It is March the 6th, and less than a week remains in the 2026 legislative session. I'm Carleen Johnson, Washington State government reporter for the Center Square, and this is Washington in Focus Daily. And today, we got a new version of the income tax bill, unveiled this morning by Representative April Berg, being the prime sponsor of this new version. Governor Ferguson already came out endorsing it. No doubt may have been in on this alternate proposal, not yet scheduled for a vote, but we're keeping a close eye on it. House members got very little sleep again up until after 1:30 this morning, voting on Senate Bill 5974, the Sheriff Decertification Bill. And in today's episode, we're going to be spending quite a bit of time talking about that. GOP members tried to make it, how they put it, less bad with amendments that were summarily dismissed. The measure did ultimately pass early this morning. And I went to the office of Pierce County Sheriff Keith Swank, met him in his Tacoma office to talk about this. If you've watched this story at all develop over the last couple of months, he became really the face for opposition to this bill when he gave intentionally provocative testimony. So what are his thoughts now that this has passed? You're going to see those in just a moment. We were the first to sit down with him and get his reaction upon passage of this bill. And my colleagues TJ Martinell and Tim Clauser are going to bring you a discussion of what they've done in Spokane this week. This is another offshoot of the pushback in some communities like Spokane to the federal immigration and customs enforcement actions that we've seen across the country, basically trying to say, you might own a space, you might have a private office space of your own. You're not allowed to rent it out for ICE purposes anymore. There's other areas in the city that they're making enforcement-free zones, basically, where ICE cannot operate. Whether or not that's constitutional remains to be seen, but my colleagues TJ and Tim will be getting into that. So let's dive in. Quick update first this morning on the latest version of the income tax bill. We got that this morning. Sponsor is Representative April Berg, and her version offered now does kind of align more with what the governor has said he wants. More money into early learning programs, increased assistance for lower income families, and an elimination of the sales tax on a greater number of consumer products. This is, of course, the overhaul of the so-called millionaire's tax. And in case you haven't been paying attention, this is the Senate Bill 6346, a 9.9% tax on income in excess of $1 million. So if you make $1.2 million, the $200,000 you make above $1 million, not just you as a private individual, but a household combined income, that $200,000 would be taxed at that nearly 10% amount. And Governor Ferguson's already pledged this morning, right after this alternate version came out, he said, hey, I'm ready to sign this thing. So certainly behind the scenes, there's been some collaboration between the governor and majority Democrats on this legislation. It also does include a further expansion of the credit for low-income families, aligned with what the governor said that he wants. So we'll see where this goes. It was earlier this week, you may recall, that Governor Ferguson came out, said, he sent a letter to supporters and donors that said, I'm going to hold off on this maybe until 2027, unless the version that passes the House includes more of what he wanted. And then we've still got a handful of House Democrats that are basically saying, we're not going to support this at all. Some including Representative Amy Wallen, who offered alternate legislation, Democrat from Kirkland. She wants the people's voice to be heard on that. She says it absolutely would require a constitutional amendment or she won't get on board. She's not the only Democrat. She's been the most vocal, openly vocal about this, but there are several other Democrats that have said the same. They want the people's voice to be heard in this. They think a constitutional amendment is the only way to go. So whether or not this new version from Representative Berg is going to get enough support from Democrats to get it across the finish line remains to be seen. All right, so item number 2 today, and this is where we're going to spend the bulk of today's episode. It was, I think, just before 1:30 this morning, that debate on the sheriff decertification bill concluded and it was signed into law. Not a single Republican supported, and at least 4 Democrats, I think from my last count, joined all the Republicans in opposition. But of course, the majority has, enough of a majority to pass that, even without some of their members being in support. This is Senate Bill 5947. It allows the state to remove an elected sheriff. They started debate early on Thursday evening, and as I mentioned, it was nearly 1:30 in the morning before they were done. I think it was close to 8 hours of debate on amendment after amendment after amendment, all those rebuffed Republican brought amendments, and the majority basically pushed back on all of those. So the final version that ended up being adopted was offered by Representative Roger Goodman. He took some elements out of the bill, but what passed still does allow for removal of an elected sheriff from office by the Criminal Justice Training Commission. And remember, almost all of those members of the CJTC are appointed by the governor. I'm pretty sure there's like 21 members. Don't quote me on that, but I think there's 21 members, and 19 of the 21 are appointed by the governor. So one could surmise that if you've got the Criminal Justice Training Commission deciding who can even be a candidate for sheriff to get on a ballot and get elected, and who can decide if somebody's social media posts as a sheriff are, offensive in their opinion enough to disqualify them from office, this is a pretty big deal. Outside of probably the income tax, this is, in my opinion, the most significant piece of legislation that is moving forward in this legislative session. So here's Representative Roger Goodman arguing support for his alternate bill on the House floor Thursday evening.
This bill will build confidence and community trust between community and law enforcement, especially our law enforcement leaders. Our law enforcement leaders should be subject to the same eligibility requirements, qualifications, and accountability measures as those who work for them, or maybe even greater, a higher bar. This bill provides that the core duty of the sheriff is to uphold the U.S. Constitution, uphold and enforce the state Constitution, and enforce the laws duly enacted by this legislature as interpreted by the state Supreme Court.
As I mentioned, Republicans had dozens of amendments, hours of debate on those. I was actually told by a member earlier in the day, Thursday, that they thought they might be able to kill the bill. That was his words. That obviously did not pan out for those in opposition. But here are 2 of the Republican members urging a no vote on this just ahead of the early Friday morning adoption of this bill.
There's nothing wrong with the current state of our sheriffs here in Washington. They can't be fixed at the next ballot box if the voters choose to put somebody else in that position. There is no necessity for this bill. Second, this bill fails the constitutional question. It raises novel questions about the ability to remove a sheriff from their duly elected position, a position that's described in Article 11, Section 5 of our Washington State Constitution, creating an entirely new route to remove them separate and apart from the vacancy route that has existed since our state's inception. Third, it fails the question of public trust. When voters send an individual to a position of trust, whether it's you or me, Madam Speaker, they anticipate that we will be able to fill out our position without being removed arbitrarily by an unaccountable bureaucracy, often located hundreds of miles away.
And I stand before you a proud past sheriff that has sworn an oath many times each time I was elected. But prior to that, Madam Speaker, as a law enforcement officer, I swore that same oath. But when you step in to swear the oath as sheriff, Madam Speaker, it's a surreal thing. Stepping into this house has been one of the greatest honors I've ever experienced. But there's a separation between the two because of the heaviness that the elected sheriff carries and the responsibility. It's not to be taken lightly. To say I'm disappointed is probably an understatement. And I will be voting no. But I commit to you this. I'm thankful for the member from the 45th and the sponsor of this bill, because we did a lot of work in the interim. But this is not the answer to what they say is we're seeking. But I'm committed to move forward to make law enforcement in the state of Washington to the best of the nation. But for now, Madam Speaker, I ask that you vote no, because this is not right. We've got a lot of work to do.
So this morning I had a chance to sit down with Pierce County Sheriff Keith Swank in his Tacoma office. If you saw it on the internet, his testimony kind of blew up the internet early in session when he basically said, just try and remove me from office. My supporters are going to surround this office and protect me. It was intentionally provocative, he told me, because that's how much he opposes this bill. He is a Trump supporter, been very open about that. He's very pro-immigration enforcement. He's been outspoken against some of the state's transgender policies. And that's why a lot of people have called this bill the anti-Keith Swank bill. He takes it very personally, but also knows that he's got a lot of support from other sheriffs who maybe weren't as publicly critical of this legislation as he was. Here's part of my conversation this morning with Pierce County Sheriff Keith Swank.
My big concern is it takes away the right of the people to elect their sheriff. This is a weapon used by the Democrats to be able to control the sheriffs. Democrats control, as you know, the state house, the state senate. Every statewide elected official is a Democrat. They control every single thing here in the state except for sheriffs. And now with the passage of this bill, they believe they'll be able to control sheriffs. They'll be able to decertify them, remove them from office, appoint the people they want to have in those positions, and then they have complete control over everybody. Well, part of the RCW that they use to remove officers and deputies to decertify them and remove them, from having their commission, a section that talks about language, about speech. Like if you use social media or you give interviews or you do some speech that they find to be offensive or things like that. Right now, I have 5 complaints lodged against me with the Criminal Justice Training Commission, and it's all about speech. There's no malfeasance in my office. I haven't done anything illegal. I don't do anything like that. This is the cleanest this sheriff's office has ever been. We're going back through auditing all kinds of practices that were here before me and fixing them. But the people who don't like me don't like what I said. They want to silence me. That's what it's about. So it's going to be a big deal. And really, maybe it needs to happen. Maybe we need to have attention brought to this, saying that Sheriff Swank said these words. We don't like it. We're removing him from office.
Also today had a chance to catch up with the man who this bill may prevent from becoming the next sheriff of Kitsap County. This is Rick Kuss. He is running for sheriff. He's already, going to have his name on the ballot. Got a campaign going for months already. He's a current King County Sheriff's deputy and a retired U.S. Navy officer who holds a master's degree in criminal justice. But despite that combination of military leadership, active patrol experience that he has right now with King County, the bill's language would disqualify him from being able to appear on the ballot. At this point, he has no intention of ending his campaign. He's in it for the long haul, in it for the fight of his life, he knows. And here's part of what Kitsap County Sheriff's candidate Rick Kuss told me today.
This is the thing for me that kind of like, what is the hill you'll die on? What is something that you'll fight with everything you have for? And having studied the Constitution, both the U.S. and the state Constitution, and realizing that I took an oath, in the military and then as a deputy sheriff to our state and federal Constitution, like this is it. To me, it's clear in writing that this is what I will stand up and fight for. Like I've talked with my wife, this is something that I have to do to like sell belongings and really, really sacrifice. This is something that I'm going to stand up for because it's something to me that is black and white wrong.
So Rick is a man of faith. He said that's what's sustaining him at this point. The campaign will continue. He's also working with others on a potential legal challenge against this. So he says ultimately this is he describes it as a hill worth dying on. So Sheriff Swank basically said the same to me today. He is working with other sheriffs across the state. There's a couple of potential avenues for legal action against this. So this is certainly not the end of it, yet to be signed into law. But this bill to allow this unelected board of the Criminal Justice Training Commission to decertify sheriffs and decide who can even run for sheriff in the state of Washington has now passed the Senate and the House, and the governor has indicated he will sign this legislation. So it's kind of a big deal, a significant one. I know we've paid a lot of attention to this one because, in the opinion of a lot of our readers who have uh, given a lot of commentary on this, I should say, on social media when we've written previous articles. I know this is something that anybody watching this does care a heck of a lot about. So we'll continue to watch this, especially the litigation, the potential litigation moving forward. And my colleagues TJ Martinell and Tim Clauser are going to bring you a discussion of what they've done in Spokane this week. This is another offshoot of the pushback in some communities like Spokane to the federal immigration and customs enforcement actions that we've seen across the country. Basically trying to say you might own a space, you might have a private office space of your own. You're not allowed to run it out for ICE purposes anymore.
Welcome to this episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, TJ Martinell. With me is Tim Clauser. And it seems like the city of Spokane does not like immigration enforcement at the federal level. Tim, what's going on?
Yeah, I would say the Spokane City Council and the city administration, yeah, that's that statement reflects their viewpoint for the entire city. I don't know if I could say as much, considering that it's it's a blue dot, but it's a relatively red area in the state. But this week, the Spokane City Council passed 2 measures aimed at restricting immigration enforcement in the Lilac City. The first of which would create what Council Member Paul Dillon calls "quote unquote" immigration enforcement free zones. And we saw something similar happen in Seattle a few weeks ago with the mayor there, Katie Wilson, announcing a similar initiative, which they're trying to codify with the city council there. But it essentially creates this patchwork of properties around the city where their ICE, CBP, and these other agencies aren't supposed to use it for civil immigration enforcement operations. So that could be staging vehicles, interviewing or detaining someone in that space, using the properties for cameras. Essentially, they're saying these immigration enforcement free zones are anything that is owned or operated by the city. Now, this could be a building, a parking lot, a vacant lot. It could be equipment that the city rents, so its own cameras. It's saying that the ICE can't be using these cameras for immigration purposes. And we're seeing a similar thing happen in Seattle. The mayor announced this initiative there. They're trying to codify it, but they're already putting up these signs around the city, and that's what Spokane's going to do too, to identify these areas. Is they're going to post these signs all around the city. It's up to, I think, the department heads to come up with a list of locations that would apply under the ordinance. But they're going to post these signs pretty much saying, hey, ICE, stay out. You can't be using this area for civil immigration enforcement operations.
Well, and if ICE says, too bad, what are they going to do?
I don't.
I
mean,
I
they've
find
tried.
one of the things that just, this is so, I don't want to use, it's not intrusive, but it's just so obsessive, it would seem, for a city that it's like, do you guys not have anything else that's any other pressing matters in your city to do this? And one of the things I find so fascinating, it's both local and state governments where they want to basically say that the feds can't touch anything. Like you literally can't get a piece of gum from them from the city or local government. But when it comes to federal funding, you better pony up the money, right? With the bitter comes the sweet. Back in the day, really long time ago, the states and the local governments were pretty much able to do what they wanted, and the feds really didn't have as much authority as they do now. But they also weren't getting the kind of funding that state and local governments get from the federal government. I mean, the number of federal grants If you're walking on a sidewalk in a city, chances are it was paid for in part by federal funding. So I just find it so interesting that there's this basically, you guys can't get a cup of sugar from us, but here's all these things that was paid for by the same government we don't want enforcing the law down here.
This law is an expansion of a policy that the city council passed over the summer, which essentially said the same thing except for permanent events. So they didn't want ICE coming into these events in a street square and then arresting people. In response to that, ICE issued a statement last summer that pretty much said, thanks, but no thanks, saying that
I think
we don't really care about it.
Yeah, I think there's something really, because this is what a lot of people might not know, but it's called anti-commandeering. It's this idea that local state governments don't assist federal officers or federal agencies with enforcement of federal laws. But no one, to my knowledge, nobody is claiming that immigration enforcement is illegal or unconstitutional. They're not claiming that. It's not like the president just passed a law when he got into office changing all of our immigration policies that now makes people who are otherwise legal illegal. They were here illegally, and that is the premise on which they're being removed, and nobody's arguing about that. I mean, that nobody's denying that there's people who are being arrested or detained who are here illegally and are breaking the law. So it's amazing that they're willing to go out of their way to not assist federal and law enforcement officers with enforcing laws against people who are breaking the law. So what message does that send to the average taxpayer who has to follow the law, or they get in trouble?
Washington State already has what many call the state sanctuary law that keep Washington working at, which essentially prohibits local law enforcement from using their resources to assist federal immigration enforcement. So council member Michael Cathcart, he pretty much said on the day is, what's the point of passing this law if that law is already in effect? I mean, this law doesn't do anything at the city level that we're not already supposed to be doing from the state law. So he argued that, these measures around ICE are more so theater that is played out in front of the city council rather than like a meaningful policy that will affect residents.
Right. And I see the statement in your story where the Spokane Police Chief, Kevin Hall, said that, officers must respond if they see unconstitutional or excessive uses of force, but he warned pitting two armed agencies against each other could create a perilous path. Yeah, it was a perilous path. Yeah. Sorry, guys, but unless there's something really bad happening and we're talking really dire, we're not going to have local law enforcement arresting or detaining federal agents. It's not going to happen. Like there's either that or there's going to be bad stuff that goes down. And I think he's probably hinting at that. He's saying this is what the law says, but no, we're not. I'm not going to have my officers be like, because can you imagine the legal, first of all, and there's a lawsuit by the federal government. Do they really want that getting in front of the U.S. Supreme Court and have an actual ruling on these kind of policies? I don't think that anybody wants to see it go that far.
Yeah, and that was a concern of Cathcart, the one conservative on the Spokane City Council. He was concerned last summer in the last few months that, by passing these measures, making statements outright against ICE and immigration enforcement, that it would cast a spotlight on the city and, invite lawsuits, invite the potential pulling of federal funding. And I asked him about this a few times recently, and he said, it's not really a concern for me anymore. As much as he isn't really in favor of this legislation and he continues to vote against it, he says, the progressive majority in Spokane is done pretty much everything they could to invite ICE there or to pull federal funding, and it hasn't happened yet. So he's skeptical as to whether or not there's anything else that Spokane can do to invite federal intervention. Not that he wants that in any way, but I don't think it's so much of a crutch in his argument as it was for us.
It's with the bit, like I said, with the bitter comes the sweet. But anyways, yeah, this is going to be an interesting situation to keep an eye on. So we appreciate your coverage, Tim. Listeners can keep up with this and others at thecentersquare.com. I'm your host, TJ Martinell. Thanks for listening to this episode of Washington in Focus.
Next Thursday, March the 12th, is scheduled to be the last day of the 2026 legislative session. There's a lot to get done between then and now. And next week, we're going to spend some time focusing on some of the bills that have died that, the minority believes they were successful in killing. We'll get into some of that and plenty more to cover in these last days of the session. So thank you for watching today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. Have a great weekend.